I have an Andrea. Gulp.
Okay.
Alrighty. Good morning. My name is Jeremy Ferguson, and I have Andrea Cabal. Sorry, I know. Sorry, there's noise there. We're with Greenway, of course, and we're going to be discussing um, sampling water. And I guess this is the GULP presentation we're doing here today. And why is it, and what is the advantages, I guess, of sampling your water, and why is it important to do so? So I guess we do have some of the discussion points here we want to start off with. And I think that's part of the bacteria. What bacteria are dangerous, and why is it important to sample those things? I'm gonna go ahead and let Andrea go ahead and kick off this now.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. My name's Andrea Cavill. I'm the lab director here at Greenway Engineering. We've been sampling and testing water here in the Shenandoah Valley for going on 13 years. So just to give you a general idea of what our laboratory does, we are water, wastewater, soils, environmental, commercial, third-party laboratory. The vast majority of our work is wastewater, but we do quite a bit of drinking water as well. On the drinking water side, we service water treatment plants, homeowners with potable wells, and also residents on the public water system within the city. So I know today you want to focus on potable well testing and why it's important to sample and test, and just general information on how to care for your well and check out your well. So the main bacteria that we test for is total coliform. It's a very large grouping of bacteria. It's present in the environment, but it should not be present in the groundwater. So it's considered an indicator organism. Total coliform itself is not dangerous, but it indicates the potential for other harmful pathogens to be present in the water. So we test for coliform because it would not be feasible to test for the thousands of pathogens that can make a person sick. Basically, if there's a way for a pathogen to get into the water supply, coliform is likely going to be found with it. So we test for coliform because it's quick, it's affordable, it's easy, it's reliable. It's basically the industry standard of determining if your well or your public water system is free from bacteria, free from contamination from a bacteriological standpoint. So likewise with that, there's also E. coli testing, and the method that we use actually detects both at once. So we first do the analysis or screening for total coliform, and if we find the presence of total coliform, then we evaluate the sample for E. coli. So whereas total coliform can indicate that something from the environment is getting into the well, E. coli is actually a fecal indicator and indicates actual fecal contamination, which can come from septic tanks failing, or sewer lines that are leaking, or from animals, grazing animals, such as cows and horses. Of course, we live in a very rural area around here with a lot of farming and ag, so it's not uncommon to find total coliform or E. coli in a well in this area. So we do a lot of testing for real estate transactions, of course, refinancing, sales, purchases, and then we do water operations as well. So like I said, the water treatment plants who have to sample regularly for these parameters. So that's kind of a general overview of the testing that we do. There are other types of bacteriological tests available. They're just not as widely sampled or used, and they're more expensive, and lots of things associated with them on that side. So coliform is your go-to for bacteriological sampling and testing.
And then the E. coli as well.
Right? Yes, coliform and E. coli. Yep, they're both tested together. So we are a Virginia certified laboratory. Currently, we do not hold accreditation in West Virginia, but we can subcontract to a lab who does. So we can service both Virginia and West Virginia if necessary. However, most of our clients are Virginia. So like I said, we are accredited for total coliform and E. coli, and we can run the sample as a presence or absence method, or we can also enumerate or quantify the bacteria as a most probable number. So those are the two techniques that we use basically to test for that.
Yeah. That most probable number, MPN, is pretty important when we're going to on a new construction of a home or real estate sampling, because that gives us an indication whether we need to shock the well or not. Because sometimes that bacteria does lie in the pipes from just not being used for so long, or from what Andrew just basically said. So it just gives you a range of a number. If it's within like under 100 MPN, I mean not MPN, but counts of bacteria, then it's worth typically shocking that well to see if we can get rid of all that bacteria that's in there. And then basically the shocking process typically takes every bit of 24 hours to sit there, and then we have to start flushing that system out. Now, part of that flushing could take a good while to happen, of course, until it's completely clear, because we're not allowed to collect any of this or bring in the samples back with any chlorine in it whatsoever. So it's got to be completely clear, and bringing just a raw water sample back to the lab is important to retest. And at that point, we see if there's any counts of coliform in there or E. coli at that point again. And sometimes it does work. I mean, what do you say, 50%, 50 to 60% typically that does turn around and works. If it doesn't, and usually when you're doing the real estate transaction or like a real estate transaction and we're on a timeline, what's happened in the past, we usually say, okay, well, we're over 100, or, we're bringing the counts of bacteria down to like 50 now. And then it's like, well, guys, let's probably just go ahead and install a UV light on this particular house. And that typically fixes that situation, and that transaction is able to go through. It's usually, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's typically how our process goes.
Yeah, most of the time it's worth it to shock disinfect. I saw that as a question, a subject that you guys wanted touched on.
Right.
In most cases, you want to give it a shot at least once, and there's definitely a proper way to do that and an incorrect way to do that. So there's a lot of aspects that come along with the well shocking, part of which is if you have a water softener, making sure that you shock the salt tank. And that you properly get the residual into the plumbing system of the house. Is if you have a water softener installed in the home and you're trying to bring the chlorine in, that salt is actually going to use up some of the chlorine, and it's going to reduce the residual in the lines of the home. So it's important to follow all the steps. We can actually provide a very detailed process. We have a video tutorial on our website to assist, and then we're available for questions and guidance throughout the process. We also offer the service ourselves. If you wish to have us deliver the shock for you, we typically go out and get the well and or the plumbing system chlorinated for the homeowner. And then typically they do the flushing, as the flushing can take extensive periods of time of somebody needing to be on site to make sure all that chlorine gets purged. So, typically we'll do just the delivery of the shock to the system and then allow the homeowner to do the flushing. And then once the well is free from chlorine, we come back out to collect another sample. So in most cases, if there is available time, we would recommend you do try to shock, just because that's going to give you more information about whether you really have an intrusion into your well or not. And then if you do get a clear sample after shocking, of course, it's recommended to continue to check your well once per year for total coliform and E. coli bacteria. So that's important too. Annual sampling is what's recommended, unless you have a change in your land use, or if you have construction nearby, then you may need to sample more frequently. But if everything stays pretty calm and undisturbed, once per year is recommended to check that well for coliform.
Yeah, another subject to touch on. Andrea just started to talk about the water softeners inside of a home. So during a transaction, when I would go out and sample for a well, total coliform, E. coli, one thing we ask the homeowner, or there may not be anyone there, and we will search for water softener. If the water softener is there, we definitely want to bypass that and then flush the system and run it and collect the sample there, because that particular water softener could be having bacteria that's lying inside of it that could make the sample fail. So that's why we need to make sure that all those are being bypassed during the transactions, whether we do it or anyone else collects a water sample. That's a pretty important note to take. Another thing I do is we do the visual well inspections that's on the surface and looking at the actual construction of the well. When we go out there, we look for the well to make sure it's, you know, extended at least 12 inches above the surface. Make sure there's no directional path of gutter drains, or surface water intrusion to the well around the cap. The cap is also a very important thing to look at as well. A lot of the wells were drilled, you know, in the 90s or 2000 time frame, and they didn't have a watertight, varmint-proof well cap. They're literally, you can go over and grab those caps and pick them right up. And when you do that and you look underneath of it, you see spider webs. I've seen all kinds of things in there, mouse nests inside where all the wires are at, you know, so you can just imagine those particular things are pretty important to look for. So even for you guys, when you first initially walk the property, look at the well cap and say, well, is it an old well cap that you might want to just go ahead and update that? Just because of anything could get in there very easily and contaminate that water. So other things that we do the visual well check is looking for buildings, structures, driveways close by, anything that's within 10 foot of that wellhead is pretty important to note. And that's about it basically as far as our visual well inspection that we do of the surface. Granted, we do take a picture of it, look at those. There's several things we check out. Oh, another thing, look for the actual well structure itself to see if it's cracked, make sure it's still sound, and also to see if there's any low areas around the well, or right around the well. So where if there's any water that could be basically ponding around the wellhead, that could channel down the well casing. And we don't want to see that happening either. So with those items said, I think we covered majority of them. Unless you guys have any, I guess we can go ahead and look at questions and some answers now.
I was curious on the wells. You said cracks. Do you all have like a camera that goes down into the well to see if there are any cracks?
No, ma'am. I'm only looking at the actual casing, at the visual part of that. So, I mean, that could be a thing if there's mud being introduced into the system. There is some companies that can go down with a camera and check those things, but I'm literally just walking on the site and looking at the casing that's exposed above ground.
And we do have contractors we could recommend for that service.
Yeah.
Surely Well Drilling is one I would highly recommend. They have a camera that's used only for potable purposes. The cameras that we have, we use mostly on the wastewater drain field side, so we would not want to use our cameras, but Surely actually offers that service. I believe it's a lump sum of $500 to have a camera, you know, visual done of the well to check for cracks in the casing. So there are contractors who do that.
Sometimes we're asked what companies actually drill a well. Is Surely one of them?
They are. Yep, they're one of the big drillers in this area. One of the bigger ones. They're out of Clearbrook
Valley. Yeah.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Sheila.
So what do you chlorinate them with? What is your shop you use?
We typically use straight Clorox bleach in most cases. It's easier to recirculate the liquid bleach. Now, if the well's too deep, we may have a problem getting liquid bleach to circulate and get the proper residual. So we may use calcium hypochlorite pellets. Those pellets are available from a commercial supplier. They're extremely concentrated, and they do work well in instances where liquid Clorox would not either work or, in this day and age, be available. Clorox is difficult to obtain right now, so.
Yes, very.
Do you think it'd be advantageous to, prior to your seller having that water test done, to go ahead and chlorinate?
No, the only way we would suggest that is if the home has been vacant for some time with no water usage.
Okay.
Or if a component of the well has been replaced. Anytime the pump gets replaced or there's work done to the actual well, you should always chlorinate at that point in time. But the problem with chlorinating immediately before a water sample is that it actually disturbs a little bit of the aquifer around it. So they recommend 10 to 14 days of regular water usage after a shock before resampling. Unfortunately, that's just a little bit of a loophole in the system, is that you can shock and then immediately sample, and that sample is considered acceptable because it's free from chlorine. However, that sample may not actually be representative of the well under normal conditions. It usually takes a week or two is what the EPA recommends of regular cold water usage through the pipes before resampling for coliform. But normally you just don't have that type of timeline available to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've had wells where people have been living in the home that have had E. coli or whatever, you know. So
Yes.
like there was usage going on at the time all along, but then
Correct.
the water test, and then that really backs up the closing and all.
It does, and that's the
Yeah.
problem, is the timeline. You know, because it's recommended to wait so long after shocking. If you truly want to know if coliform has returned to the well, you should wait, 7 to 14 days, 1 to 2 weeks, basically, to resample. But that type of time just isn't available in your line of work.
Yeah.
So
Well,
usually, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm sorry, I was
We
interrupting.
usually recommend to, if you need to get through the process, and then sample again later and see if you still have a problem. So we usually, say, get your passing sample, and then a week or two down the road, after you've been using the water regularly, sample again. And if you have a problem at that time, it can always be remedied. Coliform can be easily remedied by either shock disinfection or UV light. We've never come across a scenario where a UV light has not worked. So it's always repairable.
In Morgan County, we have issues where they want more from the water testing.
More tests completed.
Yeah, and so it really backs things up. I guess it's the moral to the story, even though you would hope that the closing will go through, is that the seller, advise the sellers to have, once it's all ratified and financing's good, is go ahead and have that well tested right then and there and not wait till the end.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, start that in the beginning process. Absolutely.
Andrea, what is the name of the company you're with?
Greenway.
Oh, you're with Greenway. You're okay. Yep. You're on the lab section. Okay.
Correct.
Yes.
I'm the lab director.
Mention that. Okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
I have, I wasn't sure if it was an outsourced lab, so that's cool that you have it inside. I have a few questions. So first off, what is an average economy UV light costing today? Like for an average real estate closing?
So we don't actually sell UV lights, but we do recommend to a contractor who does. I believe my ballpark is correct. It should be about $1,000 to $1,200 max. Somewhere, so I would say $1,000 plus or minus a couple hundred,
Boy, they really went up in 10 years. Okay.
That's the installation.
That's including installation.
And yeah.
The contractor that we recommend actually collects the sample while there. So they install the light, and then they do a brief shock disinfection of the line going from the light to the sample tap. And then they collect the sample to prove that that light is functioning. Okay. So that price that I'm giving you includes the light, installation, and collection and delivery of the sample to our lab.
Got ya. One thing I share with all of our agents is, and this comes from personal experience of the farm losing basically way over $1 million because of not having a UV light. I personally tell all buyers, if you have a well, because they can change, you can, and this once again comes from personal experience, and I personally wouldn't live in a home that has a well that does not have a UV light on, and make sure that it's maintained, just because things can change. And that's what happened with us, is there was not a UV light, and then there was something got in the groundwater and literally lost enough calves to estimate over $1 million loss.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. And so to me, one visit to the hospital or the doctor, and just being sick, no matter the cost, I mean, just being sick isn't worth not having one. That's my personal opinion. So I always tell buyers that the seller doesn't have to do it, but once you move in, you might consider having one put on.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we recommend regular sampling, like I said, once per year or more frequently if necessary. But there are certainly situations where a UV light is warranted, and one of those is on areas of land where animals graze. It's just an unfortunate circumstance associated with, grazing animals. The manure is on the surface of the land, and it's going to get into the groundwater. So,
Yeah, even the farms.
Hey, Peg.
Hello, Peg.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. We
Good,
miss you.
I miss you too. Two of my faves.
That's right.
Does anybody else have questions or think of any questions that any other agent would ask if they were on here right now? Because we're recording this.
I live in the city of Winchester, which is the water tastes like chlorine. Should I get like a filter or something? I worry about my dogs and what they're drinking.
Yes,
Just
absolutely.
get a water filter.
Yep, so a charcoal filter is what you would
Okay.
actually use to remove chlorine.
Okay.
Yep, and you can get those installed at the point of use, so you could actually have that as an attachment on the end of your kitchen tap. Or they also make the pitcher type situations where you filter the water through the pitcher, and then the pitcher.
Where did you say you get that, Andrea?
I think you can go basically
Walmart.
anywhere, Walmart, Lowe's, basically anywhere that sells the PUR brand is
Okay.
a real.
Oh, I got you. Okay, great. Thank you.
You just have to make sure you do regularly change that filter at their specified frequencies, especially for chlorine, because it's going to use that filter material more quickly than a non-chlorinated water.
You know what's amazing about Greenway? It's basically almost a one-stop shop.
Right.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
your septic permits, I mean, your soil scientists, everybody's there under one roof. So it's amazing.
Yep, and that's how our company has always tried to grow. Jeremy and I have both been here a number of years. He was here before I was here, and I've been here 13. So
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of services get added on here at the company. Mark Smith, the owner, is very diligent about making sure we expand into all the avenues possible, and he prides himself on having a one-stop shop. So
Yeah.
that is our goal.
Are you gonna move more into West Virginia as time goes by?
Probably so. We did open an office in Martinsburg. It's been a couple years now, so we're actually getting into that area more than before. Now I'm centered mostly in the lab. It keeps me rather busy, you might say. So I don't see a lot of the engineering side of things. But as far as lab work goes, our lab is a Virginia lab, but like I said, we can subcontract to a West Virginia accredited lab, no problem.
So does
Now
that,
for expanded. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, does that mean that you're taking tests from West Virginia to test the water?
So we can collect the sample in West Virginia, and we can actually test it in our lab if the contract states it as so. If they need West Virginia accreditation, then we would send it to a West Virginia accredited lab. So Virginia and West Virginia have their own separate accreditation processes, and we just don't have enough work coming in from West Virginia to hold that accreditation. But if we did, we would add that accreditation. So basically, yes, we can do it. And if you need West Virginia accreditation, we send it to a West Virginia certified lab. Otherwise, if Virginia accreditation suffices, then we can run it in-house.
What is the timeline?
We can do as fast as next day. So our pricing scheme varies. A typical turnaround is 3 to 5 business days for just our standard turnaround, but we do have expedited options available. So we can do next day, 2 days, 3 days, but the absolute fastest it can be done is a next day turnaround.
I don't know what it's called, but the extensive water testing that they have in Morgan County, do you do that also, or does it have to go to the state?
Morgan County?
Morgan County, West Virginia. Yeah.
West Virginia. I've not heard of that, but Loudoun County here in Virginia has a very strict or testing package as well. And we typically subcontract that to a lab that can do that more financially than we can, because we are an accredited lab. To run that large list of tests would be rather expensive. So there is a lab that is available that packages those tests. It's not an accredited lab, but Loudoun County actually accepts their water results. So if I saw the list and what's being done, I could better answer that question. I'm just not familiar with Morgan County.
Okay. This was good stuff. We appreciate it. And this will be, this is recorded, so it'll be in our video library, so our agents can revisit it, and the ones that weren't able to come on will be able to get on and visit it. June, do you have anything else, or any of the other agents that are on here?
I just wanted to thank Jeremy. I know how busy you guys are over there. We had Stephen White. He came once a month or so ago. Well, I think before COVID. I don't know what's happened since March. But anyway, and he was very helpful to us on the septics and going out and all that stuff. So we appreciate Greenway. You're a local company, and we thank you so much for taking time to educate us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, anytime.
Yep.
And if you all have any follow-up questions, or if anybody has a question, just feel free to shoot us an email. Be happy to provide my email address. That's the best way to get the questions through is email.
Yes.
Okay. And anybody can come and visit your facility?
As far as the lab, currently we are not allowing the public in, but once all this situation clears, we do give tours. Yep.
Awesome. That's cool. Well, thank you so much again. And if nobody else has any questions, I guess we'll call it a wrap. And thank you very much. And we will be using your service continually.
Excellent.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
Bye, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Peg.
See you, Peg.